Well, good afternoon and welcome to this afternoon's webinar, which is about completing your DSPT ahead of the deadline, which is the end of June. My name's Alan Wilmot and I'll be running through the session on behalf of the Better Security, Better Care team. And just as a point of interest, I'm also working with one of the local support teams that I'll be referring to, and I specifically work with the Sussex Digital Care team. But I will just pause at that moment there just to make sure that we've got everyone who's joining us this afternoon on board, and then we'll start the programme proper. Okay, so it looks as though most people are with us now. So this afternoon's webinar, what's it about? It's about using the Data Security and Protection Toolkit in relation to your data and cyber security. And specifically, this session is about being able to complete before the June deadline, especially for those people who are using the toolkit for the first time. But before we start, I just want to cover across a few technical issues in relation to the session for this afternoon. So this session is specifically for care providers who have never published a DSPT in the past, although of course anyone else is welcome as well. Just in case you're not aware, attendees are on mute and can't be seen. And if you do have any questions as we work through the session, then can we ask you to use the question and answer function to ask those questions? And if you're watching on a phone, then in order to be able to do that, if you tap the screen to see the controls, choose more and then Q&A, you'll be able to answer your question. Questions that we can't answer, we will come back to you, but you will need to add your email to the Q&A so we know how to get hold of you. The webinar will last no longer than 1 hour, I promise you that. And you will get access to the recording of the webinar and the presentation, which includes the links that I'll be referring to. So without further ado, we'll move on to look at the programme in terms of what we plan to cover for the session. So we're into welcome and introductions at the moment. We will be covering how you register on the DSPT, and I'll be moving through that fairly quickly. So if you do have any questions in relation to the registration process, please use the function that I referred to earlier. We'll be looking at how to complete the DSPT, and then having completed it, how do you actually publish it so that you are compliant with the requirement. And throughout the session, we'll be referring to the support that's available from the Better Security, Better Care programme. And just a reminder, please use the Q&A function for questions, not the chat function. Thank you. Okay, so before we get started, so we can gain an understanding of who's here today, we'd be really grateful if you just respond to this quick poll that we've got up on the screen at the moment. So 3 questions. Has your service currently registered on the DSPT? If you're registered, have you started to complete it? And are you a single or a multi-site organisation? So if you wouldn't mind responding to those questions just by clicking on the appropriate response, we'll get a much better feel of who we've got with us today. And then once you've all responded to that, I can just have a quick look before we move on to the programme per se. Okay, so if people have responded to that, are we able to see the results? Okay, so 77% of you have responded to registering on the DSPT, 15% not, 8% don't know. Second question is your organisation already registered? Have you started to complete? So 60% of you have already started to complete. So you may have specific questions in relation to why you haven't completed yet. And then lastly, how would you describe your organisation? So we've got 66% of you are single site organisations. So that's brilliant. Thank you. Thank you for helping us with that. So let's move forward to have a quick look at an introduction to the DSPT and just a short video explaining why the DSPT is so important for you and your organisation.
Better security, better care with the Data Security and Protection Toolkit. As a care provider, you store and share important and often sensitive information. This includes data about the people you support, their family and carers, through to staff, partners and funders. To store and share that information, whether it is on paper or digitally, all care providers must have systems in place that reduce the risk of cyber attacks and information breaches. If you don't, your business and reputation could be at risk, and you could be breaking data protection law. The Data Security and Protection Toolkit, or DSPT, is an online self-assessment tool. You can use the toolkit to check your data and cybersecurity policies, procedures and practices, and demonstrate that you have good systems in place. This can reduce the risk of a data breach and the risk of a fine if a breach occurs, as you will be able to show the Information Commissioner's Office the steps you were taking to reduce and manage risks. All adult social care providers in England, regardless of size, service type or ownership, should complete the DSPT at least once a year. When you have completed the toolkit, you can publish and share information about the standard you have reached. So what levels can you reach on the DSPT, and what do they mean? There are currently 3 levels on the DSPT. Approaching standards means you are meeting minimum legal standards. It's a temporary stepping stone to the next level, and you will need to produce an action plan to show what you will do to get to standards met. Approaching standards also enables you to get NHS mail, an accredited secure email system which helps you to share confidential information with local authority, NHS and other colleagues. Standards met is the level you really need to reach. It demonstrates that you are going above basic legal requirements, and it helps you to take some proportionate measures to protect you from cyber criminals. It will help you to reassure people who use your services, their families, and your staff that you are managing their information safely. It will also enable you to answer the Care Quality Commission's questions about managing data. And if you are accessing NHS patient data or delivering services under an NHS contract, you must have reached standards met. Local authorities are also increasingly asking for the DSPT in their contracts. Standards met opens up access to shared digital systems with other organisations, including GPs, hospitals, pharmacists and the CQC. It underpins the government's programme to digitise social care. Finally, standards exceeded indicates that you have gone beyond required standards. So, for example, you may have Cyber Essentials Plus in place. As a care provider, you should complete the DSPT at least once a year, but we know that not every care provider feels confident about using the toolkit. To support you, the NHS-funded Better Security, Better Care programme provides direct support, as well as useful guides, templates and a helpline to enable you to publish your DSPT and to protect the vital information you store and share. To find out more, visit www.digitalcarehub.co.uk/better security, better care.
Okay, so hopefully that's given you a broad overview of why the DSPT is so important. So let's have a look at an overview of the toolkit journey. So how does it work? What does it look like? So simply, it's a step-by-step approach. It's registration on the toolkit, completing the questions within the toolkit, and there are 43 questions that are for standards met. and that's the target that we should be aiming for. However, if you can't get there in one go, it is possible to answer the 26 mandatory questions and produce an action plan. And so you could publish at approaching standards. However, you're only able to publish at approaching standards once, and you will need to review your DSPT on an annual basis, 30th of June, which is why the session this afternoon is running, to enable those of you who haven't got there yet to get there. And it's very much about ensuring that your organization is current in terms of its response to data and cyber security. And we'll look in each of these stages in a bit more detail as we work through. But firstly, please remember that there is lots of support out there to help you get to the final journey. So Better Security, Better Care is the official partner on the DSPT, and the programme is paid for by the NHS, and it includes all sorts of online guidance, as you can see on screen here. There are templates you can use to update your policies, helplines and tailored support from the 28 local support partners that I referred to right at the very beginning. And they're across England, and Sussex, who I work for, are one of those support partners. At a national level, Digital Social Care is providing guidance, helplines and support to the larger providers particularly. Another key reason for completing the DSPT are CQC. And they're increasingly expecting a good provider to comply with the Data Security and Protection Toolkit, or DSPT, as a minimum requirement to demonstrate your compliance with data requirements. And that applies whether you use digital systems, paper systems, or a combination of both. And DSPT is now a requirement under the new single assessment framework, under the well-led governance, management and sustainability area. And if any of you are wanting to read what that says, there is a link on the bottom of the slide to be able to get you there. So context is set. Let's move on to the how. So the first stage that we looked at on that overview was the registration process. So registering on the DSPT for the first time is relatively simple. However, there are a few things you need to be aware of if you haven't yet registered. The first thing you need to do is to find your ODS code. ODS codes are a code that's provided by the NHS to each health and social care organisation in order to give you a unique identifier. And each organisation has more than one, which is why it says on the slide, choose which ODS code to register with, so that the system can recognise which organisation you're registering on behalf of. So having registered, they will send you an email with a link. If you click on the link in the email, you'll be able to set up your password to access the DSPT. So a further look at ODS codes just briefly to explain that there are different ODS codes. So for every organisation, there is a head office code, plus site codes for each site. So every organisation will have two codes. They'll have an HQ code and a site code. If you are a single site organisation, you need to be registering on the DSPT with your V code. You can ignore the A code if you're a single site. For multi-site organisations, it is slightly different. If you've got a group of care services that share the same policies and procedures, it's possible to register with your HQ or your A code, and that registration will cover all sites. So you won't need to complete a DSPT for all sites. So where the arrangements for data and cyber security at each site are the same or similar, then you can register with your HQ or your A code and then indicate that that should cover all of the sites linked to that HQ. For more complex multi-sites, again, it's slightly different. You may have several branches and or more than one type of service that you're providing, so home care and care homes, etc., in which case you might have more than one HQ code. And I would suggest that if you're registering for the first time as a multi-site organisation, it's appropriate to contact the help desk or the National Service Desk at the email address that's provided here in order to gain advice in terms of how best to manage the registration to minimise the amount of duplication within the organisation on your DSPT. If you are a multi-site, there has been some changes recently in relation to the DSPT. So when you republish and revisit your DSPT, all of the sites with that organisation should be linked, and you're able to, as is indicated on the right-hand side of the screen here, register and select the sites that you want to be included in this publication. If you need more information on that, we can provide that later if you just contact us through the Q&A. And also, it's useful to add your registered managers in the various sites as viewers or auditors of your DSPT so that they can see what you've published on behalf of them for. If you're not sure of your ODS code, then they are quite easy to find. And there's a couple of links on the slide here that if you follow those links, it will take you through to the ODS website where you can search for your particular organisations. And it's a fairly straightforward process to actually gain access to your ODS codes. Or failing that, and you really can't find your ODS code, you can contact the National Service Desk at the NHS, and they will be able to help you unravel what your particular organisation should look like. So moving on to the DSPT again. So where do you start? So to find the toolkit, you would go to dsptoolkit.nhs.uk, as is indicated on the left-hand side of the slide here, and that will take you through to the page that you see on the right-hand side, and you can see that we've highlighted a couple of links on that page. If you're not sure where your organisation is at with the DSPT, you can click on Organisation Search and you can then find out whether or not your organisation is currently registered or whether they've published. And if you find that you're not registered with the DSPT, then click on the Register link as indicated at the top circle, and that will take you through to the registration process where you will enter your ODS code, etc., as we've just indicated. So having registered for the DSPT, you're then able to complete the next stage of the process, which is to complete your organisation profile. And that's simply asking what sort of organisation are you? So choose social care. And that will then restrict the questions within the toolkit to just questions that relate to social care rather than hospitals, doctors, etc., etc. It will then ask you a few other questions about roles within your organisation. So who's your data protection officer, your senior information risk officer, your Caldecott guardian, your information governance lead. Those questions may not be applicable to all organisations because you may not have those specific roles. So it's perfectly acceptable in the organisation profile to leave those questions blank. You're still able to proceed to the DSPT questions. So I referred earlier to multi-site organisations setting up registered managers, etc. It is possible to set up other users within the DSPT, regardless of whether you're a multi-site organisation. So the person who registers and completes the DSPT will be the administrator, and they're able to manage users, add and edit evidence and publish the DSPT on behalf of the organisation. But it's possible to add other members to the toolkit who would also be able to add or edit evidence, or you can set up someone as a viewer where they have access to see what's within the DSPT but not to change it or to publish it. So that can be useful where you have more than one person with particular expertise around data and cybersecurity, etc. When you add a member, they will be sent a message to say that they've been added, and they need to then respond to that within 24 hours, etc. So that's the registration process pretty much covered very briefly. But if you do need support on registering, then there is further assistance available to you. You can either contact one of the 28 local support organisations. You can go to the Digital Care Hub, where there's information as indicated at the bottom there, or if you're a multi-site group and you want to gain clarity about ODS codes and the registration process, then contact the National Help Desk, as the middle link there shows on the left-hand side. And then on the right-hand side of the slide, there's a couple of useful links that will take you through to either your local support partner or information on the Digital Care Hub website. So registration complete, profile set, and you're ready to answer the question. So I'm just going to pause there for a couple of minutes just to check if there are any questions on the registration process, because I'm aware I went through that fairly quickly just there.
Yes, we do have one question.
Yeah,
Would you please provide information on new development of DSPT for multi-site organizations and how we can see both on the same platform?
right. If you've registered with an HQ code, an A code, then all of the organizations that are linked via CQC to that organization should be available on your DSPT entry. And later on, I'll be showing a slide that indicates what sites are linked to that HQ registration, and then to indicate how you might want to publish on behalf of all those organizations. So, but basically, on the home page of your DSPT entry, it should have a see all sites link that is a drop down box that will show all of the linked organizations to that. But we'll see that in a bit later on when we look at publishing for your DSPT.
Lovely. Thank you, Alan. We've just got another question come through.
Yeah,
What if you've taken over as manager and the administrator has left? How can they take over as the admin?
right. If you know the email address that was used and that email address is still current, then you can use that if you when you go to the home page of the DSPT and log in, it will ask you for the email address and the password, and there is a forgotten password access. If you don't know the email address, or the email address is not functioning because they've left, then you can contact the help desk and they will be able to reset it for the new manager.
Oh, lovely. We just literally had another one come through.
Yeah,
Will the links on the presentation work once the slides are shared? Currently, oh yes, no, they will work. It's just on
hopefully.
presenter mode at the moment, and we'll send through some extra resources for things like multi-site organizations as well, relevant to any questions that anyone asks.
Yeah, and there was a question there about, I just saw a question pop up in the chat about registering for dom care and care homes. I'm not sure what the question was referring to there. Is there any clarification on that?
Um, I'm not sure. Maybe they're wondering if it's slightly different for different services.
Right, okay. No, the toolkit is set up for social care, so it doesn't matter whether you're a care home, domiciliary care, supported living, etc. It's the same toolkit for all of those. It's the social care bit that's important rather than hospital or GP, etc.
Lovely, thank you, Alan. And that's all of the questions. And if I could just remind everyone to please use the Q&A function instead of the chat, just so that things don't get lost as well.
Lovely, thanks, Rihanna. Okay, so let's move on to completing the DSPT questions then, which is the important bit about how to publish, etc. So, having registered and set your profile, you're then able to click through to the questions. Just a couple of points on the screen at the moment that are worth knowing. The DSPT is a self-assessment, so it's you responding to the questions in terms of how your organization covers those areas. Your answers are not published, they're not public. The only thing that's published is your DSPT status that you've achieved based on your self-assessment. So it's not a tick box exercise. However, you do need to answer it with integrity. So it does need to reflect the reality in your organization. However, you will be the only people that see what you've put in it. It is a toolkit I primarily aimed you assessing your organization's response to the requirements around data and cybersecurity. So it's not trying to prove to anyone that you do it other than yourselves primarily. So having said that, what do you see if you are registered as a social care organisation when you log in? You see the social care view, and the social care view is just part of the overall data security and protection toolkit. There are a lot more questions within it, but they don't apply to a social care organisation. So by clicking on social care, it stripped out all of those questions. So in order to get to standards met, you will be expected to answer all of the 43 questions within the toolkit. You will notice, however, that some of them are marked mandatory, and there are 26 of the 43 questions marked mandatory. If you only answer the mandatory questions, you will only be able to publish at approaching standards. And as we've said, the objective is to get to standards met when you're reaching full compliance, in which case you'll need to respond to all 43 questions. In terms of once you're through to the questions, how does it then work? Well, if you click on the blue text, it will open up the question. So you click on the evidence item, which is the blue text, as you see on the slide here, and that will then open up the question with the full question, a tooltip guidance, and the ability to respond to that question in the context of your organisation. So let's have a look at how the toolkit is structured. So within the toolkit, there are 4 sections. So the questions are grouped under 4 headings. So staffing and roles, policies and procedures, data security, IT and systems. So IT systems and devices, sorry. So you can see, as I've just mentioned, that the mandatory questions are 26, which is the middle column there, and that's to achieve approaching standards. And then if you answer all of the questions, you will be responding to 43, and that's to achieve standards met. Staffing and roles is about having a named person responsible for this area and your induction and ongoing training processes. Policies and procedures is about registration with the ICO, having policies and procedures in place, retention schedule, privacy notices, etc. Data security relates to having good building physical security in place for paper records and your electronic records. IT systems and devices obviously is about your IT processes and having basic good practice covering antivirus software, etc. Small organizations can sometimes struggle here, including not knowing what to look for in an IT support company. So the questions is designed to help you understand what you should have in place and how it should work. So following the questions within the toolkit enables you to understand what you should do and how you should do it. So what do the questions cover? Staffing and roles, 3 main areas: responsibility, staff records and contracts, and training for all staff. So who has responsibility for this area of work? It's asking about who carries the can. If something goes wrong, who's responsible? Who's responsible for reviewing and auditing practices and processes within your organisation? Staff records and contracts, that's about knowing what staff you have, what level of access they should have, etc., and something in their contracts about keeping data safe. Data protection and cybersecurity training is what training do staff need at all levels. So it does require that you carry out a training needs analysis covering staff and finding the right training materials and providers for your needs. So just a reminder that all staff need some training. The level of that training depends and should relate to the role that they fulfill within the organisation. And for approaching standards, data protection and cyber security training must form part of their induction programme. Okay, so let's have a look at staff records. What we're going to do is to work through one question now as an example, just to show you how it works. But before we do that, it's important to remember that you must keep your records of staff and volunteers up to date and the roles that they fulfill, because that has a bearing upon data security responsibilities and access to confidential information, etc. So let's have a look at what the question actually asks. Does your organisation have an up-to-date record of staff and volunteers if you have them and their roles? So it may seem a redundant question, but actually it's really quite important in terms of those areas that I've just been referring to. If you don't know what staff you've got and what they're employed to do, then it's difficult to know what level of access they should have to the confidential information that you hold, etc., in order to be compliant with the regulations and legislation. So in the toolkit, you can use the comments box to respond. So again, within the toolkit, question 411 is at the bottom of the staffing and roles question. And if you click on that, it then opens up the question completely. So you can see that this particular question is a tick box question. So on the top left-hand side of the question, there is an orange box. So it asks if your organisation have those records that we've just been referring to. In order to respond to the question, all you're required to do is to tick that box. However, the comments box can be useful because it can help to indicate where those records might be kept, for example. So let's have a look at an example response. So does your organisation have that record? Yes. So that would indicate that you've ticked the box on the top left. In the comments box, you could put something as we've got on the screen, which tells people where their records are kept, both hard copies and electronic copies, and how to access them should they need them. So now let's have a quick look at some of the questions and how they work in more detail. So for each of the questions, and this is question 115, who has responsibility for data security and protection, and how has this been formally assigned to that individual? So that's the question. Underneath in the smaller text is the tooltip. That gives best practice guidance and advice. It's basically what you need to do in order to be able to respond affirmatively to this question. So this particular question is a text box. So it's asking you to type something in the text box. So you would write your answer in the top box as indicated where it says write your answer here. So it's simply a question of typing in your response. So Bill Bloggs manager has this responsibility, and it says so in their job description. The comments box again is optional and can be used for indicating any other information that you might want to refer to or someone else might want to refer to within the toolkit. You can also see that there's some blue text above the text box on the top there, and those are links that will take you through to further information that relates to this particular question topic. And throughout the toolkit, there are links through to either the Digital Care Hub website or to other websites such as the ICO for further guidance and advice. One last point I want to make on this slide is that where it is a text box response, as it is on this slide, you need to write your comments in your response, in the top box. If you put your answer in the comments box, the system won't recognize the question as having been completed. So let's have a look at another question in relation to how it works. Have at least 90% of staff, directors, trustees and volunteers in your organisation completed training on data security and protection of cybersecurity in the last 12 months? So what this is indicating is that the training is required not just at induction, that it needs to be part of your ongoing training on an annual basis, etc. So, and bearing in mind also that it needs to be at the different levels for the different levels of responsibility. And training is something that we frequently get asked about in terms of where can we get this stuff. So Better Security, Better Care have developed some useful resources. So for all staff, there is a free e-learning course that's easily accessible. There are 4 modules, each of them 15 to 20 minutes per module. It uses case scenario based approach, so it's really accessible for all staff. It's completely free. You don't even need to register in order to be able to use it. And it's compliant with the question we've just looked at in relation to staff training. So it provides data protection training for staff at all levels. There is also further training that's available in relation to data leads. So again, it's a 4-module training program, 15 to 20 minutes per module. Again, case scenario based, but this one is tailored for those leading on data protection and cybersecurity and with specific responsibilities. Again, it's completely free, and you can see there is a link to the training on the slide there. And then more recently, Better Security, Better Care have also introduced the cyber game, which is an interactive educational simulation of cyber attacks in social care settings. Again, it's free. It's an interactive online game set in a social care environment. And it's basically about your organization exploring how you would respond to a cyber attack, etc. So you can get scored on security time cost to understand the impact of the choices that you make. And it's in essence a role play with various roles for you to explore and work out throughout your organization. There are also 2 other tools specifically for managers within your organization. So there's the manager's discussion tool and a quiz for staff. So if you wanted to check what staff had picked up from training and whether they've assimilated the learning that they should, you could use the multiple choice quiz for frontline staff in order to gauge that. And there is also the manager's discussion tool, which is designed to open up discussion with staff, perhaps in supervision, etc., in relation to their understanding and awareness around data and cyber security. So resources are available to help you to respond to that particular question and in order to meet the staff needs in relation to training and development. So let's move on to the next section of the toolkit, policies and procedures. So what does the question cover? Well, there's 12 questions within this particular section. So it looks at ICO registration. So you need to check that you're registered with the Information Commissioner's Office. It covers what your policies need to cover to help keep the data you hold safe and secure, how you check that that's being implemented through audits and spot checks, etc. It also covers more recently the national data opt-out in relation to your responsibilities around that and whether you've fulfilled those responsibilities. Talks about holding and sharing information, and this is particularly about your ROPA and your IAR, your record of processing activities and your information asset register. Retention schedules, how long do you keep records? How do you dispose of them? Is that safe and secure? And a list of suppliers that handle personal information. So do you have external DBS? Do you have external HR payroll, etc.? What services do they provide and how do they guarantee you that they keep that secure, etc.? So let's have a look at one of the questions in that particular section. So ICO registration. It's a legal requirement for every organisation that processes personal information. There are a few exemptions, such as small charities, but that's unlikely to be the case for a care provider organisation. So you need to make sure that you are registered, and this particular question within the toolkit is designed just for you to identify what your registration number is, etc. If you needed to find out what your registration number is, it's available on the ICO website, and you can see just under further reading there is a search the register button, etc. So specifically what the question asks, what is your Information Commissioner's registration number? So if you don't know what that is, you can go to the ICO website and find it. If you're not registered, you do need to register because it is a legal requirement. And your registration number usually starts with a Z, so you would simply type it into the text box You may want to make some comments in relation to that, then click on save, and the system would recognize that your question has been responded to. So if we have a look at an example response to the question, you can see that the response is we have an ICO certificate on our wall with our ICO registration number, and then some indication as to where that certificate is within the organization. So fairly straightforward. However, if as you work through the toolkit, you do find there are some areas that you're not sure of, there is further support available. So there are template policies available on the Digital Care Hub website. There's also additional required policies that relate specifically to standard Met and some recommended documentation available. All of these are available through the link on the bottom left of the slide there. Or you can contact your local support team yet again if you wanted some specific advice, if you're particularly unclear. One thing you do need to make sure of, though, is that if you do use any of the resources as indicated on the slide, that you do make sure you tailor them to reflect the reality within your organization. So lots of stuff there in order to be able to respond to section 2 of the toolkit. Let's have a look at the third section on data security and what the questions cover. So it talks about data breaches. So you will need to be clear on what a data breach is. You'll need to be clear on what is a near miss. And then the questions are around what should your plans cover in terms of should you experience a data breach, who do you need to report it to, how do you need to report it within your organization, and what do you need to do in order to be able to respond. So this is one of those questions within the toolkit that there are variations on how you can respond, because if you haven't had a data breach, then it's perfectly acceptable to respond to the question by ticking the box and putting in the comments box not applicable. However, it is really important that you answer that honestly and understand what a data breach is before you do that. This section also looks at your physical security, paper records when they're taken out of the organization, etc., if that's the case. Your business continuity planning. Does it cover data emergencies? What should it cover in relation to that? And do you audit to make sure that your business continuity planning will work, etc.? So let's move on to the last section, section 4, IT systems and devices. What do the questions cover? People and their access to information. So this relates to what I was saying earlier in relation to not everyone should have access to all of the personal and confidential data that you hold. It needs to relate to the specific job role that they are employed to fulfill. So you need to be able to identify who should have access to what information. It also then talks about passwords and your password practice within your organization, backing up electronic information to make sure that you can still access that information in the event of an emergency or a disruption, protecting devices, including a bring your own device policy. So if people are using their own devices, such as smartphones, etc., at work, what are your policies and procedures around that? What can they do? What can't they do? How do you make sure that any confidential information on those is safe and secure? Technical setup and support. So do all devices have antivirus software and up-to-date operating systems, etc.? And then what documentation should your suppliers have in relation to the agreement with you and the contract with you in relation to data security and protection, etc. So you may need to run some of these questions past IT suppliers if not sure, etc. But it may well be that you're able to answer that yourselves. There is an additional question that's been added fairly recently to the toolkit around multi-factor authentication, which is obviously the most effective way to protect data and protect your accounts from unauthorized access. And when responding to this question, it states that you should consider all systems that can be accessed from the internet. So that's email, digital social care records, cloud-based storage. and all user accounts need to be protected with MFA where it's appropriate. There is a link on the slide to implementing multi-factor authentication within your organization, and there is further information available on the Digital Care Hub. However, let's just have a quick look at what multi-factor authentication is. So, as stated, it's a way to make your online accounts much safer by, in essence, adding extra steps into the login process. Usually that's a text message, email code, fingerprint, or authenticator app such as Microsoft Authenticator. And you will probably be familiar with it from using things like online banking or social media, etc. It's becoming more and more common. And overall, it's about ensuring we keep all data safe by only allowing people to have access who should have access. So in order to be able to respond to this question, there are a few things you need to do within your organization. So what steps do you need to take? Well, you need to be reviewing your current systems and speaking with suppliers to understand what's possible, what's not possible. You need to identify any potential issues that you might have within your organization, such as sharing device logins or passwords, those sorts of things. And also identifying where MFA might be a step too far. If you've already got significant controls in place who keep it safe, then you may not need to implement MFA. So it's about deciding on your organization's balance between the security on one hand and the usability on the other. You don't want to put people off. However, if you decide not to implement MFA, that should be agreed at director or board level with an understanding and an explanation as to why that is the case. So in terms of balancing how it all works, it's important to stress that you shouldn't be going overboard. Systems have to be usable. You don't want to add so many layers that people don't want to access the system or find ways around the security that you set up. So it's about identifying the appropriate level of security for each system you use based on the nature of the data that's within it, the usability of that system, and how prepared you are to take a risk, if appropriate. So where appropriate, MFA should be implemented for all individual logins to systems, where appropriate again. And if you're not sure about all of that, again, use the support that's available, either your local support organisation or your software providers, etc. If you do need more guidance, then obviously there's information available on all 4 sections within the toolkit on the Digital Care website, or you could contact the local support partner again, or other aspects of the Digital Care Hub website. All of it is free, all of it is endorsed, all of it is appropriate for a social care organisation. So once you've worked your way through those 4 sections, you are then able to publish at the appropriate level depending on the questions that you've completed. So how do you go about doing that? Well, if you've only answered the mandatory questions, the 26 that I indicated earlier, and you've responded to all of those, but the other questions are not completed, then at the bottom of the toolkit, as you scroll down, there will appear a blue Publish Approaching Standards Assessment button. So in order to publish, you would click on that link. That would then ask you to complete an action plan to show how you're going to complete the rest of the questions in the future. So you would click on the download the action plan, you would complete the action plan and upload it to the system. So then the system would indicate that you have published at approaching standards and the date that you published. If you've completed all 43 questions, then the blue Publish button will just say Publish Assessment. So all you would need to do is to click on the Publish Assessment, and that will then show on the DSPT website that you've published 2 standards met and the date that you published, remembering that it's the status that's published, not the answers. So If when you click on the published assessment, you get a pop-up, it may look like this. And that would indicate that there's some issue somewhere within the toolkit. And you can see in the red box in the middle there, it's indicating on this particular example that there are 2 questions that haven't been completed. It may well be, and is often the case, that the reason for that is that the response to the question has been put in the comments box rather than the text box. But it can also be that you've just missed a question. However, if you click on the red link that's within the box, it will take you to the particular question where you can review exactly what's going on and respond appropriately in order to do that. Once you've responded to all of those, it should then re-show the blue published assessment button at the bottom. You click on that and it will again reflect within the DSPT website the fact that you have published and the date. If you registered with an HQ code, and this is where we get into the bit that I was referring to in the questions earlier, so a headquarters assessment, you can view the branches where the arrow is indicating. Just under the blue bar there is a View Branches link. If you click on that, it will open up the drop-down box with all of the branches that are registered with that particular A code linked to the HQ. So if you're confident that they've got the same policies and procedures, IT systems, data security arrangements, etc., then you can click on each of those organisations and publish your DSPT on behalf of all of those organisations. If, as you work through the publication process, you feel that you're not clear on something or something's not working, then there is further support available. The top link there is guidance on publishing for the first time. The second link is how to contact your local support partner for personal one-to-one support in relation to that. So we've worked through all of that process. We've now published. What can we do with it? Well, it's possible to get a copy of your publication. And if you log into the toolkit, you will see the assessment there, and underneath the progress bar there is a download assessment button. If you click on download assessment, it will immediately download the questions and your responses to an Excel file. However, should you wish to save it as a PDF file, then that is also possible. So you would log into the toolkit, you would click on this time View Previous Publications, which is above the download assessment. That will then show all of the publications that are linked to your particular organisation. Select the one that you wish to download the PDF for. Click on View Details, and then you'll be able to save it as a PDF. However, you'll notice underneath the View Details, it also says Download Certificate. So it is possible to download a certificate that will verify that you have published your toolkit at standards met. Once you click on View Assessment, if you then click on Control P to save it as a PDF, it will take you to the print window, which if you then change from the printer to save as PDF and then click on save, you'll be able to download your PDF and save it on your filing system. Why would you want to do that? Well, a few tips in relation to once you've published as your DSPT. You may be publishing in terms of a multi-site. Really important that you tell your branches, A, that you've published, and B, what's within the responses to the toolkit questions so that they can make sure that they are compliant with what you've said about what they do and how they do it. So tell your registered managers. You can download your certificate and copy it for the various locations. Add DSPT status to your website or indeed your privacy statement. Increasingly, organisations that you may be putting in bids, such as local authorities, are asking for DSPT compliance. Tell commissioners, NHS partners, IT suppliers, etc., that you have completed the DSPT and that you're basically serious about data protection and cyber security. So to summarise, what can you do with this information once you've got it? So what you need to be doing first and foremost is to make sure that your DSPT entry reflects the current reality within your organisation. So keep it up to date throughout the year. If anything changes, reflect that within your DSPT. It means that the DSPT accurately reflects your organisation, but also it will be easier to republish come the June the 30th deadline. Again, ensure that managers and staff understand what's expected of them in relation to the areas covered by the DSPT. And again, enable managers to access the information that you've put within it by having the printout of the documents, either Excel or PDF. And remember, it will always be useful for CQC too. And it's really important that I want to stress that the DSPT can be more than a once a year issue, because the DSPT is not the end goal. The end goal is about ensuring that we have a safe and secure service upholding the rights of the individuals that we support. So we should be encouraging data protection, cybersecurity by design and default within the organisation. And that's what this is all about. So next steps, what do you need to be doing? If you haven't already done so, register on the DSPT. If appropriate, contact your local partner, visit the digital care hub, etc. If you are a large provider and you're starting the process, contact the digital care hub support team. Check out the guidance that's available and then answer the questions on the DSPT, remembering that you don't have to complete it in any particular order. You can dip in and out as often as you like, etc. So it's completely flexible. Whatever you put into it will be saved when you log out. And again, various links there to support and help that is available to you. And I'm going to stop there and just open it up again to any questions that you might have in relation to anything we've said or not covered.
Hi, Alan. Yes, yeah, a few questions here.
Yeah.
Do suppliers to NHS Wales also have to complete this, or is it just applicable to NHS England?
As far as I'm aware, it relates to NHS England, but I don't know if there is an equivalent within Wales, I'm afraid. That's one we may have to get back to you on.
Yes, I'll type you a message just now because it's an anonymous attendee. And if you give me your email address, then we can get back to you on that one, just to clarify. We've got someone raising the hand. If you just want to put your question in the Q&A, and then we can get back to you. Another question we've got is, what documents do we need to upload under the data security section in questions 7.1.1 and 7.2.2? I was just looking for these questions, but I don't know if you know the questions.
Yeah, I do.
Okay,
Yeah,
great.
that's relating to the information asset register and your record of processing activities. Just before I respond to explain what they are, in that particular question, there is a multiple choice in terms of how you respond to it. So there is an option to upload the documents, but you don't have to. If you look at the bottom option, it says enter text. So if you click on that, it will open a text box and you can just type in where the documents are. The information asset register is in essence a record of what personal and confidential information you hold and where you keep it. The record of processing activities is what you do with it, who do you share it with, and on what is the legal basis upon which you hold and share that information. They are both requirements within GDPR in relation to people who process personal and confidential information.
Lovely. It's getting quite active in the Q&A section. I'm trying to answer as many as I can. But the one I'm just typing to now, what criteria do we need to satisfy to attain the standards exceeded level?
Standards exceeded will be awarded when you first complete the DSPT. You only get the social care questions. The next time you complete the DSPT, once you've published the first time, you will see the full toolkit. And if you respond to questions that are not within the social care assessment, then it's possible to achieve standards exceeded because you've answered more than the bare minimum for social care.
Lovely, thank you, Alan. The annual IT penetration test 9.2.1, is this
Right.
necessary, as it might be difficult to do with our current building and ISP provider?
Right. It's not an essential question for social care providers. It is for health service sector. So if you're a social care provider, you don't need to complete that question at all. If you're a health provider, then you do need to complete that question, I believe, and there is specific guidance in terms of how to do that and what you do, etc. But I'm not sufficiently au fait with the process to be able to give you guidance.
Lovely, thank you, Alan. Do people need to register to access the training resources for data protection? And if so, can our staff based in Wales register as well? I can answer this one.
Yeah, go
All of
on.
our training resources are completely free. They're all available on the website, so anyone can use them. And we suggest that you do because they're all available and they're very useful. So
Yeah.
another question, what happens if we miss the 30th of June deadline?
Oh, they'll come knocking on your door. No, there's no actual consequence. Other than the fact that you won't be, what it will show is that you are non-compliant on the DSPT website if someone does a search, and therefore you won't be able to respond to, for example, um, tenders, etc., to say that you are DSPT compliant. But there's no actual tangible consequence other than the fact that your organisation can no longer assure itself that you have met all of the requirements.
Yes, exactly. So that answers part of this other person's question. Second part is, can you still submit after the deadline? And the answer,
Absolutely. You can
yes.
publish at any point during the year.
Lovely. Um, no, and that's it. Just a couple of private questions here. So
Right. Just to go back to that last question about consequences for not publishing by the 30th of June. Whilst there is no actual tangible consequence as such, um, it goes back to what I was saying about the integrity within the organisation that and the purposes behind the toolkit, that it's about your organisation reassuring itself through the self-assessment that you are compliant with all of the requirements. So I don't understand why it wouldn't be part of your annual audit in terms of what we do and how we do it to make sure we are compliant and operating best practice um, within the organisation. Okay, so if there's no further questions, just one last thing before we go. Just a few more questions in relation to gaining some feedback from the session. So, what impact has it had on your confidence? How likely is it that you'll complete and publish? How likely is it that you'll contact your LSP? Would you recommend the webinar? And where did you hear about it? So if you could quickly just respond to those simple questions for me, I would be very grateful before we let you go and get on with the very important work that you probably got waiting for you.
lovely. Thanks so much, Alan. I'll pop the poll up just now, just to say we've had a question. If you
Okay.
share your email address, will it be seen? It won't be seen. So
No.
do share, and I'll get back to you on that.
Yeah. Okay. So if you wouldn't mind just clicking on the appropriate responses. And then once we have all of the responses in, I'll let you go and get on with your life, as I said. Okay, so has everyone had the opportunity to respond to the poll? If we could have a quick look at your responses. Okay, so 94% increased confidence. Excellent. 4% no impact, 2%, oh dear, reduced my confidence. If you're one of those, if you're that person that says it's reduced your confidence and you want to contact us for specific guidance over the area of concern, we're more than happy to do that. 74% and 23% likely to publish. Excellent. And 98% of you would recommend a webinar. That's excellent. Thank you. Right. Well, thank you very much for your attendance. Thank you for completing the poll. And it just remains for me to say best of luck with your DSPT. And don't forget, there is support out there. If you need it, either the Digital Care Hub, your local support partners, all are very competent and very willing to help in any way, shape or form that you require. So thank you very much and goodbye.
Thanks so much, Alan. And you can't see, but we've had a few people come into the Q&A section and say thank you very much for a great webinar. So
Excellent. Thank
thanks
you.
again, Alan.
Okay. Thank you all.